Well, you know, when you first get elected to Congress, you get here and you see all the tall ceilings and everything's made out of marble and mahogany, and you pinch yourself and say, how did I get here? Then this term in Congress, I've looked around at my colleagues and wondered how they got here. Have you seen, I mean, seriously, have you seen this bill called the Green New Deal? Has anybody heard of this? Okay. The thing that's most offensive to me about the Green New Deal is not that it's green. I think all farmers are green. They're the greenest people on the planet, I mean, in terms of conservation and taking care of their own farms. The thing that's offensive to me is that there's New Deal in it, as if the government needs to come and do something to farmers or to us. I think we need a Green Bill of Rights that says what farmers can do and what government won't do to farmers. But I read the Green New Deal. It's only 14 pages long. I encourage you to read it. It's not like most of these bills we vote on that are, 3 feet tall if you print them out. It's only 14 pages long. And when I got to the end of it, I realized why it's only 14 pages. There's only 64 crayons in that big box. Did anybody, I'm just going to continue with stand-up, if that'll work. Did anybody see this State of the Union? I thought it was the best State of the Union I've ever attended. If Mr. Haney would leave his speech up here, I might rip it up, but just as a prop. But the State of the Union was so good, I stood up and clapped for bills that I'm pretty sure I'm not even going to vote for. That's how good it was. And then right the day before the State of the Union, or maybe it was the day after, I think it was the day before the State of the Union, they had the Iowa caucus. So Nancy Pelosi wasn't having a good day. You know, the Democrats picked nobody as the winner in Iowa because somebody told them nobody can beat Trump. And I think that's why they picked nobody.
That's good.
I'm sorry, work with me, I'm writing my own material. Some of it I'm writing right up here while I'm talking. I've been here 7 years in Congress. I've worn cowboy boots every day that I've been here. And I remember back in the beginning, John Boehner gave me some grief for wearing cowboy boots on the floor of the House. And he caught me in the aisle and he says, Massie, what's up with the boots? And at first I thought, uh-oh, is there some rule against it? Then I realized, I said, Mr. Speaker, there's at least 10 members of Congress here that wear cowboy boots on the floor. He said, but they're from Wyoming and Nevada and Arizona. Pfft, you're from Kentucky, Massie. Why are you wearing cowboy boots? I said, Mr. Speaker, I think I'm the only cowboy here that has a cow. He goes, all right. So he never gave me grief for wearing cowboy boots after that. But it's a practical thing because like sometimes I'm leaving the house, like the other day, this was 2 weeks ago, one of my staff, they were driving by, so they came to my house. I have a long gravel driveway. They hate that. They try to keep their cars clean, and then they come pick me up. But we get back to the end of my driveway, and I said, let's check out my cattle here, go slow. And I looked over there, something wasn't right. There was a calf laying down in an odd posture next to the hay ring. And I said, is that calf stuck in that hay ring? Does anybody ever had that happen with a cow? The little squares at the bottom. Anyways, this calf had his head in there, and I knew if I left, when I got back, he was going to, wring his own neck. So I said, all right, let's go back up to the house. I'm wearing a suit, by the way. Go back up to the house, get a Sawzall with an extra battery and a fresh blade, and I cut that metal piece so that the calf could get out. So now we call that calf Jeffrey Epstein because he tried to wring his own neck. And I knew I was going to get blamed for it if I didn't save him. How many people in here raise cattle? Wow, that is a lot of people who raise cattle. I have 63 head now, and that is like twice as many as I need because my kids have left the house. By the way, I used to have my sons feed the cattle, and I've got an old backhoe, and we feed with that. You can grab one bale in the back and one in the front. You curl the hoe around one bale. I looked out there one day, and one of my boys had figured out how to pick up 2 round bales with the hoe, and he was pulling a wheelie going through the field with my backhoe. And I thought, that is ridiculous. But now that I have to feed them myself, I grab 2 bales at the back. because I try to get done with it as quick as I can. But Rand, I wish he was still here. I'm going to steal one of his stories because it's illustrative of where we are, I think, with the cattle market, with calves and whatnot in Kentucky. He used to tell the story in the Soviet Union, a guy went to buy a car. And he went to the car dealership in the Soviet Union, and you could have whatever your car you wanted as long as it was the same color as everybody else's car, and there weren't many options. And the guy said, we'll come back in July of next year, and we'll have your car ready for you. And he said, what, that's, July of next year. He said, what day? And he said, well, the car salesman was just dumbfounded that this guy would be that stupid and ask what day. It's 18 months from now. He says, well, July 13th. And he said, well, what time? And he said, you idiot, I just told you it's like 18 months from now. Why are you asking what time on July 13th? He said, because the plumber is coming that day. Now, we joke about that because they're so backwards, and were in the Soviet Union and still are to a large degree in Russia, because communism, central planning, all these regulations don't work. Well, have you recently called a meat packer to try and get your cattle butchered, processed? Okay. I called the one that I use in December. They have a spot available in April. Okay? That's because they're a USDA facility. Okay? And if you can get into a local custom slaughterhouse, maybe in 2 weeks and 3 weeks. But then you can only sell half of your cow or a quarter of your cow if you want to sell it to your neighbor to eat. Has anybody in here ever bought a quarter or half a cow, or eaten a quarter or half a cow from their own cattle? Has anybody ever had one butchered that way? I see a lot of people shaking their head. Nobody's ever got sick from that. Nobody. In fact, you know exactly where it came from because you know who you bought it from. So I have introduced a bill to try and solve this problem. I mean, we joke about how bad Obamacare is, right? But you've got to wait 6 months to sell your neighbor a steak? This is a failure of our economy. It's a failure of our regulations. It's a failure, not of capitalism, it's a failure of government being too big and having too much regulation. So the reason you have to wait that long is if you want to sell meat by the package, it has to be butchered at a place where there is a full-time USDA employee. Can you imagine if every restaurant that cut up the meat had to have a full-time USDA employee? Can you imagine if every grocery store where they got a piece of meat hanging in the back and they cut up the slices there for that day, can you imagine if they all had to have a full-time USDA employee? That is the requirement right now on custom slaughterhouses. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be inspected. In fact, they are all inspected. But they don't need to have a full-time employee. So I've introduced a bill called the Prime Act. And the reason I'm telling you about this is I need your all's help. I need your help on this bill. I'm getting no help whatsoever, and I need your help on this bill. I've got Senator Rand Paul as a sponsor in the Senate. Senator Lamar Alexander is a sponsor in the Senate. And this is the best sponsor, Senator Angus King. He sounds like a hamburger this week only at McDonald's, the Angus King. But so I've got this bill in the Senate. I've got a lot of sponsors in the House. I think maybe 20 sponsors in the House. Democrats, Republicans, everybody understands there's a place for regulation. And yeah, the big meat packers probably need somebody there full time. But the small houses don't. And so what this bill would do is it would let you sell beef to your neighbor using a custom slaughterhouse by the cut instead of by the cow. And I don't, you know who opposes it? I'll just tell you right now. The meat packers. There's like 4 that control the industry, and they oppose the bill. Literally everybody else that's got any common sense is not opposed to this bill. But the money is against me, and that's why I need your help, because you all drive the agenda of the Farm Bureau, and I need some help from Farm Bureau on that. Here's another issue that sort of, by the way, somebody on Twitter said, oh, Congressman Massie, you raise cattle. You're doing this so you can make money. You have a conflict of interest. How much do you stand to gain if your bill passes? I said, well, at the time I had 50 cattle. I said, There are 50 million cattle in the United States, and I have 50 of them. So I'll get 1/1,000,000th of the benefit of this legislation if it passes. But I think it's important that you know something about what you're trying to legislate. And so on cattle, I do know a little bit, not as much as many of you in this room. One thing that upsets me that I want to talk to you about trade is in 2015, the World Trade Organization came to Congress and said, take off country of origin labeling on beef and pork. Okay, here's what's scary about this. My mother-in-law was in the hospital last week, and they gave her apple juice. And my wife looked at the label, and it said apple juice made from apples in China and the United States. Now, we all know that's probably all the apples, except for one, was from China, right? The scary thing about that is not that it was from China, or not that it was labeled, it's that your beef and pork is no longer labeled. Like if you went to the grocery store to buy beef and pork, you wouldn't know which country it came from because Canada and Mexico sued us in the World Trade Organization. We lost, and then they came to Congress and said, you all have to pass a law and take off all the labels for beef and pork. Your shoes are labeled, your car is labeled, your tools are labeled, your iPhone is labeled, your apple juice is labeled, but your beef and pork is no longer labeled because of that dispute. So that's one of the things that I wanted to get right in USMCA. And instead of being a no, I was a yes if. Yes if you can fix this. They didn't fix it. Okay? And that is something, hopefully, if you see with the coronavirus and everything that's going on, goods are not equal. The stuff you raise in the United States is so much better than the stuff that is raised overseas, and it deserves to be labeled as such so that the customer can decide. So, you know, we've got willing consumers that want to buy food. We've got farmers that want to sell it to them. Sometimes they're next door neighbors, and they can't even do it without breaking the law. One of my other bills is a bill that would make it easier to sell raw milk. Now, I know there's some people in this room that are against it, and some people are for it. When I first introduced this bill, also, by the way, this has over 20 co-sponsors, Republican and Democrat. When I first introduced this bill, the milk lobby came after me. I'm telling you, they were relentless. They said people are going to die and Congressman Massie is going to be to blame for all the deaths. And kidneys will fail and children will grow up wrong and whatever. And my wife saw all this. Her Google alerts were going off. You know, she's still back in Kentucky working the farm. She texted me. She said, did you see what they're saying about you? I said, yeah, you know, I've got a thicker skin than her. She texted back, OMG, I didn't realize the lactose lobby was so intolerant. In any case, we had an event in Kentucky, some of you may have heard about it, called the Rogue Food Conference. A room this size, 300 farmers and consumers came to figure out how do you solve this problem. Not like how do you comply with all these ridiculous rules, how do you get around them? And it's a sad state of affairs when you got people who want to buy food in this country from people who grow food in this country, and our own government is getting in the way. So that's what I want your help on. Look at my legislation. If it's bad, if it needs fixed, if there's something wrong with it, tell me. I will fix it. I want to get your support on these bills. Some happy news that I haven't heard discussed yet, waters of the U.S. We finally got the ridiculous definition that Obama put rolled back for waters of the U.S. His definition included ditches on your farm that only have water in them when it rains. Obama's definition, his definition included groundwater that you can't even see as navigable water. And just this was literally the week before or the week of the State of the Union and the impeachment and the Iowa caucus. Nobody hardly paid attention to this. But President Trump rolled back the ridiculous definition of the waters of the U.S. So that's something to be glad about. I want to close with a couple stories about President Trump, and by the way, Jamie Comer's President Trump stories are the best, so I can't compete. I'll just say that right off the bat. I haven't been on Air Force One, I haven't been on Marine One, I haven't even been on Amtrak One yet. But I have met the president several times, and twice I've had the opportunity for my kids to meet him. My wife always gives up her chance so that one of my children could meet the president. And so the first kid that wanted to meet the president was my daughter, Sarah, because she goes to Lewis County, it was at the time middle school, now she's at Lewis County High School, public school. Every kid in the school has asked her, have you met President Trump? You can imagine. And so she wanted to be able to say she met him, so instead of taking my wife to the White House Christmas ball, I took my daughter, Sarah, 14 years old. And she practiced shaking my hand for a week because she wanted to get it right. And then when we finally got a chance to meet the president, she goes up, grabs his hand very tightly. She had the perfect handshake. And she looked him in the eye and said, Mr. President, can you make school lunches great again? So every kid in her school is very happy now with her. And he, by the way, he took her seriously. And they have been working on that. And he said, we will work on that. The other story I want to tell you is about my son. When 2 days before he went to boot camp, I said, do you want to go meet the president? The president was in Kentucky for a rally for Andy Barr. So I took my son back there to meet the president. And he told him that he had just signed up for the military. But he also told the president, he said, but you better win your re-election because I signed up for 6 years. And the president said, you'll have the best equipment. So fast forward, President Trump was back in Kentucky again, and my son he's overseas. I won't say where because this might be filmed. And by the way, he is a door gunner on the Black Hawk now. Anyways, I asked my son, what do you want me to tell the president? He said, Dad, tell him the troops love him. He said, everybody over here, I don't care what they say, everybody over here loves him. And nobody believes my picture is real, the picture I have with him. So tell him they love him. So I got up to Trump, and I gave him a Sharpie, and I gave him a red, hat, one of those famous red hats. I said, would you sign this for my son? He's in the Army, the one you met a year ago. And he said, sure. When he looked at my pen and he handed it back, he said, give me one of my pens. So he got one of those pens that he signs the bills with, and he signed the hat with that, put the cap on it, and gave me the pen and said, give him the pen too. And so I said, my son wanted me to tell you the troops love you. And he said, yeah, that's because I got him new Black Hawks. And I told my son that. He said, yeah, we got 8 new ones, Dad. So anyways, thank you very much. Thank you for coming up here. It's an honor to represent you.